Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today I'm going to be doing a little bit something different, and this isn't going to be a deck profile, but this is just going to be a talk about a deck that has recently sprung up and has started slowly taking event after event, or at least topping event after event. So the deck in question is this 2-color control deck, or what the community has labeled it as 2CC for short. But basically what this deck is doing is it has two very powerful elements that it's playing around with. The first big powerful element is it's trying to utilize the recovery mechanic to the fullest. So the recovery mechanic just allows you to constantly heal yourself, making sure that you'll always have security, so that way you're always going to be in the game. And then that kind of ties into the second element that the deck is playing around with, which is what it's doing with the security. And what it's doing with the security is it's utilizing a lot of these very powerful and very impactful removal type cards to just go 1-for-1 with the opponent and make their security that much more dangerous. So the whole idea is that you're going to be playing around with these recovery cards to keep yourself as healthy as possible, and then your security is always going to be a threat just because the majority of what your deck is going to consist of are these removal type cards to just destroy the opponent's Digimon if they try to aggress onto your security. At least that's the idea of it, but on top of the fact that you have a whole bunch of very powerful removal cards, we also have security Digimon added into the game, and they also could be used with the combination of a lot of these recovery cards, so that way you could actually have some Digimon pop out of nowhere, and then that's kind of your aggression on top of whatever you're hard playing to get the recovery type effects off. So currently in the English format, we've had 3 decks been topping and dominating the format. Those 3 decks are Red Omni, Yellow Shine, and Rookie Rush. And each one of those decks kind of keeps each other in check, where it kind of creates a whole rock, paper, scissors, or triangle format. So the idea is Shine beats Red Omni beats Rookie Rush beats Shine. So that's kind of the triangle, and where does this deck kind of fall in? Well, it kind of falls into the middle, where it has a really solid matchup on each of those decks if the opponent doesn't know what's coming or what the deck is doing. And that's kind of like the big surprise element, is a lot of people just don't know what the deck is doing or how to play around the deck, just because it's a relatively new deck and it's sprung up kind of out of nowhere. It really wasn't out of nowhere, considering Japan has been playing with it since December, and it's had its iterations in the different formats there. But the fact that it was a surprise to the English format definitely means that it had a leg up on a lot of the competition, just because it was a new deck that people just, again, don't know how to play around. So the first big thing you have to understand is what the deck is doing in order to properly play around the deck. So we already know that the deck is heavily security focused, so obviously we don't necessarily want to always attack their security unless we feel very comfortable about attacking their security, because sometimes they could just have a bad security stack, and then that makes it very easy for us to win, because then a lot of what they were relying on just didn't really exist to begin with. But that's just a huge risk in order to take, so there's proper ways of mitigating that risk. One of the big ways of mitigating the risk is just identifying, again, what the deck is trying to be doing. So the deck is trying to utilize a lot of these hard removal elements to just kind of get rid of your problematic Digimon and just make you rebuild, but the idea is you can only rebuild so many times and rebuild only so much. So that's kind of the whole idea of the deck, is it is a grind style deck where it's just trying to grind you out and remove a lot of your resources that you're playing with, so that way it can safely aggress onto yours without worrying about anything on their side. And then on top of that, they are utilizing the fact that sometimes you can't deal enough damage, and the recovery mechanic will help them stay in the game while they're just aggressing onto you very, very slowly, just because if you're aggressing onto them, you're triggering some of their security abilities, or at least that's the hope and intention. And then you're utilizing these security abilities to act as your removal and to spawn some Digimon, so again, that way they could slowly aggress onto yours, because they know that you're not going to be able to recover your security while they could recover theirs. So now that we know and understand what the deck is doing, the next question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we beat this strategy? And what cards do we need to use or could be using to beat this strategy? So the easiest thing that we could think of in order to beat a recovery style of deck is just to outdamage their recovery. So cards with security attack +1 or multiple security attack pluses on top of the fact that maybe they could attack multiple times definitely means that you have ways to out damage their recovery, so that way you could aggress onto them and eventually you'll end up winning just because you'll be able to deal more damage than they can recover. So there's a ton of different cards in a ton of different colors that allow you to gain security attack +1, so that way you could deal some additional damage to the opponent. And then there's a ton of cards in the game that just gain or can have security attack +1 naturally. So those are also really good cards to think about utilizing. And then very similar, you have cards that also can allow you to multi-attack, which again, all lead into the fact that you're going to want to try to out-damage their recovery. And these are just some simple examples of that. Then the other big element we know the deck is going to be playing around with is the fact that they're going to be playing a lot of hard removal that is going to end up going 1-for-1 with our Digimon. So if we want to play around that type of strategy, then we need to have Digimon that are able to spawn more Digimon or are able to recur themselves in order to outplay their removal. So they're utilizing their removal to try to grind us down so that way they could safely aggress. But if we're able to utilize our cards to make it very hard for them to go 1-for-1, then we're eventually going to overtake them and we're able to close out the game that way, just because they only have so much removal and we only have so many cards of our own. So if we're able to, again, just go wide or have our bodies spawn and replace themselves, then that allows us to easily aggress onto them just because they won't be able to deal with our board because they're going to be out of removal cards eventually. But all of that is definitely easier said than done, and the deck can still be very infuriating and frustrating to play against it just because it's still going to be doing a lot of very powerful things that you might not always have the answer to at all times. So you might have to shift your gameplay and play the game a little bit differently than you normally would in order to try to beat out the deck, or you're going to have to run some specific tech cards to try to help you in the matchup. So depending on the type of deck that you're playing, you do have access to a couple of tech cards that do kind of hard counter the deck a little bit. So one of those cards, if you're playing red, is War Greymon. So this is the BT01 version of War Greymon, just because he has this really powerful when digivolving ability to give himself security attack +1 for the turn. Unfortunately, he doesn't keep that security attack +1, but if you're reasonably going to expect him to live only one turn anyway, then that's all you really need out of the card. But on top of him gaining security attack +1, he also has this really powerful other ability where during your turn, this Digimon doesn't activate the security abilities of options that are checked. So if the opponent is trying to rely on their security to act as removal and play their options for free out of their security to remove your threats, then War Greymon just turns that completely off entirely. Then, if you're playing something like black, you could play Craniamon. So Craniamon is a blocker, but you're not really trying to utilize the fact that he is a blocker, although it does help because it stops them from aggressing onto you. What you're really trying to utilize the card for is the fact that he has this very powerful ability where during all turns, your Digimon with blocker can't be deleted by the opponent's card effects. So he having blocker means he is affected by his own ability, so he acts as a pseudo-indestructible Digimon. Yes, they could DP reduce him down, but you also have ways in black to DP boost your Digimon during the opponent's turn, so that way it's less potent and requires more effort out of the opponent to try to remove Craniamon than it's worth. So there's a very high chance if you're playing Craniamon against the security deck that Craniamon is just going to stay on the field for the whole game, and there's not really a whole lot of cards that the opponent's going to have in order to deal with Craniamon. And then another card that you could possibly run in red or like Rookie Rush or some other style of decks is Agumon Expert, just because Agumon Expert basically is a one-card combo. So he has this very powerful on-play ability where we get to return one Digimon with Agumon in its name from our trash to our hand. So the whole idea behind this card is if the opponent is going to end up trying to remove all of our cards anyway, well, they can't remove Agumon Expert forever, so the idea is you're just going to keep replaying Agumon Expert to grab back your other Agumon Experts to just always have Digimon on the field to aggress onto the opponent because, again, they're going to eventually run out of removal and they're eventually going to be running out of recovery, so you're just going to utilize Agumon Expert's one-card built-in combo with himself to just aggress onto the opponent and you'll eventually overtake them. And then if you're really worried about security as a whole, you also have access to cards that just straight up burn the opponent's security and removes them without checking any of their security. So if you're playing Patient Enough, Gallantmon in red can be really, really potent just because if their trash is nice and filled, then one swing will just delete a security, and then if you have security attack plus underneath him, then he could deal even more damage relatively quickly. And then you also have Massimon to think about, where she's acting as both a burn for you and your opponent, and then you also get to res a body, and again, like, they both are taking away the security, so that way the security check doesn't happen, and then on top of which they both could be doing very powerful things in their own right in their own respective decks to help against this type of a matchup. But if your deck isn't running any cards that could help deal with this type of matchup, you just need to understand how this matchup is played and play your deck a little bit differently. So normally, Digimon is a game where it incentivizes you to Digivolve all the way up from your lower level to your higher level, and every time you Digivolve, you are going to be drawing a card, but that's just playing into a deck like this's strengths, where the idea is if you do that type of play, then they're just going to remove your one Digimon, and then you drew a whole bunch of cards and used a whole bunch of cards while they invested very little to remove the card that you just played, and then you're just going to have to rebuild again. And if you keep doing that over and over again, you're eventually going to run yourself out of resources, and you won't really able to stabilize any form of board state. So in order to play around that type of strategy, you could just Digivolve minimally just to get enough card draw to see more cards, but you need to just start hard playing a lot of your cards, so that way if you do go 1-for-1 with the opponent, you have more Digimon than they have removal in their deck, and because you still are going to be Digivolving a little bit, you still are going to be able to try or attempt to outdraw them, just because, as you can see, there's not really a whole lot of ways that this deck can draw outside of their Rookie and their Digitama, and some minor evolutions from their Ultimates to their Megas. But outside of that, there's almost like no natural card draw in the deck, so you could just minimally Digivolve, play a go-wide strategy as best as you possibly can to just help try to deal with the matchup. But as we can see going forward, the deck really doesn't have that good of long-term longevity. So the deck really isn't getting anything in the next set to really support its current strategy, just because there's no real good tools that they could utilize for that style of deck. So if we take a look at BT04, we could see exactly what's in that set and what's coming, and we could see as far as Red Digimon or Security Digimon, there's no new Security Digimon, and there's no good Red Digimon that they could utilize. If we take a look at some of the Yellow Digimon, again, there's nothing really there for them to utilize because almost nothing is recovering outside of this card, but this card really is not that great because she'll eventually be removing her own security, so she's kind of counterproductive, but like the idea is you want to get rid of her as quickly as you possibly can. But again, in a style of deck like this, they're not always going to be able to do that, and thus they're probably not even going to bother running this card. And then they also get access to Lucimon, but outside of that, a lot of these cards just aren't really doing anything for the deck. And then if we take a look at all of the new tamers and options for the deck, there's really not a whole lot there. Like, maybe they'd consider running Trident Revolver just as some additional removal and to try to be able to play their tamers that they have in the deck anyway. That's not exactly the best use of the card. And, like, they're not going to be running Heir of Dragons. Even though the draw 2 is nice, the removal ability isn't super great. So it's not like they could actually utilize this card in a meaningful way. And then if we look at some of the yellow option cards, they do get a little bit better, but like nothing too insanely over the top. So like Tactical Retreat's a pretty decent inclusion just because it has a really good security ability to just recover one, and then it also has a nice main ability to just be able to place one of your Digimon face down, so that way you could recover one that way as well. And then they get like another decent control tool, but like, is this card really better than the Lightning Paw that they're running one of anyway? But like, it's still definitely cute to think about. And then on top of the fact that the deck really isn't getting any new tools, there's just a whole bunch of more tools that are going to be able to deal with the deck in various different ways. So we have Ancient Greymon, and thanks to the new promo cards, we have a good way at just aggressing onto their security very safely, because if our Digimon's just going to get deleted anyway, then having these nice on-delete abilities is just really, really nice, because we actually gain some benefit out of the card for having it get deleted, thus de-incentivizing the opponent from wanting to delete this card. But again, thanks to the Yagunimon promo, we could utilize this card to aggress onto the opponent that much quicker and that much easier with. Then we also get Don Devimon, which Don Devimon, just if they're trying to aggress onto our security and Don Devimon is just sitting on the field, then he's just also going to be picking off the opponent's security. And then on top of that, he has a really powerful on-delete ability that takes away 2 cards from their hand. And because they're not drawing a lot, if they remove Don Devimon enough, then they're just not going to have a hand and they can't really play the game. And if they can't really play the game, then like the deck just really isn't doing anything. And with the new Devimon promo, we have ways to recur Don Devimon from our trash, so we don't even need to worry about seeing multiple copies of Don Devimon if we only see one, just because we have ways of grabbing him back and replaying him. And then we also get cards like Nidhoggmon, where they just have a very large body themselves. So the majority of the removal that's going to be coming from the yellow side is going to be DP reduction, but the best DP reduction card that they have is Glorious Burst, and that only DP reduces by 12. So the fact that we still can live through a lot of their potential removal definitely limits the amount of interaction that they're going to have with our larger bodies. So there's definitely a whole bunch of really powerful level 6s and 7s that are getting added to the game to just help allow you to aggress and deal with the matchup that much easier. On top of all of the current and existing cards that we already have to help deal with the strategy. But looking at what the impact of this deck is having on the secondary market, obviously any cards that are revolving around this type of strategy that are slightly on the harder side to get are spiking up in price. So as we could see here, the promo Patamon that they like to play 2 to 4 of is definitely increasing in price compared to what he normally was before. So he's definitely on the incline. Same thing with Seraphimon. Seraphimon is also slightly on the incline, just because he is a good 2 to 3 of in the deck, just because he is a solid way for them to be recovering. And then we could see the same thing happen with Magna Angemon, where Magna Angemon took a huge spike just because of how good this card is, although I definitely think that Magna Angemon is a little bit better than some of the other cards, thus making him a lot more hotter of a buy, just because he could be played in various other decks that just aren't necessarily this deck, where the other cards before are only more specific to this deck. And then we already knew that there was a buyout on the Alt Art Holy Wave. The normal one really isn't doing anything, but the fact that people are still going to be buying up Holy Waves to be played as a possible option in that deck definitely puts a lot of spotlight on it. But I don't really think that you should be investing in a deck like this just because there's no real long-term longevity to the deck, and as more players play the deck, more players will figure out how to play around the deck. So once more players figure out how to beat the deck, then it's not going to be performing as well as it's going to. So the deck is just going to get progressively worse as time goes on from this point forward, especially since we know a lot more people are going to be picking it up, which means a lot more people are going to be playing it, which means a lot more people are going to be playing against it. So again, this is just more of a deck of the week, where this is just what's popular just because it's something new, it's something different, and it's what's currently topping right now. But is it really something new? No, it's really not. People have been playing around with this strategy, like I said, for months already. Like, I made a 3-color video of basically the same exact deck about a month ago. So again, not really surprised to see it top here, even though my iteration was using 3 colors. Again, just more iteration means more refining means the better it's going to get. And like I said, it was doing very well in Japan for a very short period of time until people learned how to play against it and their meta changed. So in Japan, they had a couple of events where this style of deck topped in first. So you could see the Japanese list here, and then you could see another example of a Japanese list in December topping with the same type of strategy here. So again, this deck really isn't anything new, and it's definitely something that doesn't have any longevity or much longevity in the future, so I definitely wouldn't be hardcore investing in it. If you already have the cards, sure, go ahead, play with it, but again, as more people figure out what to do against the deck, then the deck isn't going to be performing as well, and then it's just going to fall out of favor when the next set hits anyway. But like I said, there always is going to be some iteration on the deck, and as the deck gets played more, people are going to figure out more different things to do with it to make the matchups better. But again, I don't necessarily think just a couple of minor tweaks and changes is going to make the deck that much better than what it currently is. So as an example, here is another topping deck from the PPG events this past weekend, and it's almost the exact same thing with just a minor different tech cards based on personal preference and what they thought they'd see in the event. So I really hope this type of video helps you understand what the deck is doing and what you should be looking out for in the deck and with the deck. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.